before the throne, before the vision, before the voice. There stands a being who does not teach. It does not announce itself. It does not declare its purpose. It does not offer explanation or comfort. It simply stands, immovable, silent, absolute, at the boundary where heaven ends and something beyond heaven begins. This is not the angel of Annunciation, not the messenger who brings glad tidings, not the guide who leads the worthy through celestial halls. This is the guardian, the final resistance of heaven itself, the one who bars passage not through hostility, but through sheer ontological necessity. In the oldest Ascent narratives, there is a moment that arrives without warning. The mystic has passed through 6 heavens, has survived the interrogations of lesser gatekeepers, has proven worthiness through seal and name and invocation, and then silence, a presence that does not question, does not negotiate, does not grant or deny based on merit, only presence, only authority, only refusal. The guardian does not explain why passage is forbidden, does not justify the boundary it enforces. It exists as the living embodiment of a cosmic law older than revelation itself, the law that states proximity to the divine center is not a right to be earned, but a threshold that destroys all who approach unprepared. This is not theology. This is the architecture of heaven, made manifest in a single, immovable form. The guardian emerges from the Hekhalot literature, the palace mysticism of late antiquity, where Jewish visionaries recorded their journeys through the layered heavens. These texts, preserved in fragmentary form, describe an ascent not of the body but of consciousness itself, passing through 7 concentric spheres toward the throne of divine presence. But the ascent is not guaranteed. At each threshold, gatekeepers demand proof, seals, names, invocations spoken in precise formulae. The unprepared are cast down. The presumptuous are consumed. Access is earned through knowledge so exact it borders on incantation. The Merkabah tradition, the chariot mysticism that precedes and informs the Hekhalot texts, establishes the danger. To approach the throne unprepared is to risk annihilation, not punishment, not divine wrath, simply dissolution, the collapse of individual consciousness into the overwhelming radiance of unmediated divinity. The texts record this not as theological speculation, but as experiential report, the testimony of those who survived encounters that others did not. These are not warnings born of caution, but maps drawn from actual journeys through celestial architecture. The guardian appears in these narratives as the final obstacle, not at the first gate, where the unworthy are easily turned away, not at the middle realms, where the partially prepared stumble, but at the 7th threshold, the last boundary before the throne itself. Here, the nature of guardianship changes. Earlier gatekeepers ask questions, they test knowledge, they demand credentials. But the throne guardian does not interrogate. It does not assess worthiness. It simply exists as the embodiment of a principle, that access to the divine center is conditional not on moral merit, but on ontological capacity. The texts rarely name this being. Some call it anaphil, Others speak of Galissur, the revealer and concealer. But names are uncertain, shifting, contested. What remains constant across traditions is the function, the presence at the threshold who prevents premature encounter with the source. This is not protection of the mystic. This is protection of cosmic order. The guardian exists to preserve the integrity of heaven itself, to prevent the collapse that would occur if unprepared consciousness were permitted to approach the throne unchecked. The boundary is not arbitrary. It reflects a fundamental metaphysical truth that the divine center cannot be approached by multiplicity, that the throne admits only unified consciousness, that individuality itself must be surrendered, not symbolically, but actually, before the final gate opens. The guardian stands at the gate of the seventh heaven, not before it, not beyond it, at the threshold itself, the liminal space where ascent ends and transformation begins. Its function is absolute, to embody boundary, not to judge those who approach, not to evaluate merit or purity, simply to exist as the living law that states, passage beyond this point requires complete ontological transformation. The Hekhalot texts describe what the guardian guards, the throne room itself, where the divine presence sits, enthroned above the cherubim, surrounded by consuming fire. To enter unprepared is not to be denied. It is to be erased, not destroyed in anger, but dissolved in overwhelming radiance. The guardian does not prevent this dissolution out of compassion. It prevents it because such dissolution would disrupt the cosmic order. Individual consciousness approaching the throne without proper preparation would collapse into the divine center prematurely, creating ripples throughout the celestial spheres, destabilizing the architecture of heaven itself. Fire surrounds the guardian, not decorative flame, but ontological fire, the boundary between formed existence and formless source. This fire does not burn the worthy. It does not test resolve. It simply exists as the interface between multiplicity and unity, between individual consciousness and absolute presence. The Hekhalot texts describe this fire as extending in all directions, forming a sphere of transformation around the threshold itself. To pass through requires not resistance to burning, but compatibility with flame, the capacity to exist in both formed and formless states simultaneously, if only for the instant of crossing. Seals and names grant passage through the lower gates, but at the seventh threshold, seals become irrelevant. Names lose their power. The guardian responds to nothing external. No invocation, no formula, no credential. It responds only to the internal state of the one who approaches. Readiness is not moral. It is structural. The mystic who has truly unified consciousness, who has shed multiplicity, dissolved ego boundaries, achieved internal stillness, passes through not by permission, but by resonance. The guardian does not open the gate. The gate opens because the one approaching has become ontologically compatible with what lies beyond. Stillness is the guardian's authority. It does not threaten. It does not command. It does not speak at all. Its silence is absolute, not the silence of refusal, but the silence of pure presence. In that silence, the unprepared recognize their own incompatibility. The mystic who has not achieved internal unity feels the disparity between their fractured consciousness and the unified stillness required for passage. This recognition is immediate, undeniable, not a judgment handed down, but a truth revealed through direct encounter with what one has not yet become. Refusal becomes cosmic necessity. The guardian does not deny entry. It reveals the impossibility of entry for those still bound to multiplicity. The threshold itself is the test, not administered, but encountered. To stand before the guardian is to stand before a mirror that reflects internal fragmentation too clearly to ignore. The guardian is not wrathful. Wrath implies emotion, and the guardian transcends emotional categories. It is not compassionate either. Compassion implies concern for individual welfare, and the guardian's function serves cosmic order, not personal protection. And it is not negotiable. There is no bargaining at this threshold, no appeal to divine mercy, no invocation that compels passage. The guardian simply exists, immovable as law, silent as necessity, absolute as the boundary between existence and source. The guardian is not an angel in the conventional sense. It is a principle made manifest, the principle of limitation itself, given form and stationed at the final boundary. Hermetic philosophy recognizes this function. The guardian represents the ultimate planetary gate, the final sphere through which consciousness must pass before entering the realm of pure nous. In the Hermetic cosmology, ascent through the spheres involves shedding the attributes accumulated during descent. Passion at one level, ambition at another, the illusion of separate selfhood at the highest. The throne guardian marks the point where even the subtlest attachments must be released. Not moral imperfections, those have been shed at lower gates, but ontological multiplicity itself. The persistence of individual consciousness as a separate thing, distinct from the divine ground. This is why the guardian cannot be bargained with. It does not evaluate, it simply reflects. To stand before it is to encounter the living law that states, unified consciousness may proceed, multiplicity cannot. The guardian reveals incompleteness without judgment, impossibility without cruelty. It exists as pure feedback, the universe itself responding to the structural state of approaching consciousness, indicating readiness or its absence through the simple fact of passage granted or denied. Limitation in this context is not restriction, it is intelligence. The wisdom that knows form cannot enter the formless while remaining form. The guardian embodies this intelligence, preventing the collapse that would occur if unprepared consciousness were to approach the throne. The threshold is itself alive, not metaphorically but actually. The boundary between the seventh heaven and what lies beyond is not empty space or passive barrier. It is conscious presence, awareness without individuality, intelligence without personality, law without legislation. Annihilation becomes the final requirement. Not death of the body, that is irrelevant at this level, but death of the separate self. Complete dissolution of the boundaries that define individual existence. The mystic who cannot release this final attachment cannot pass, not because the guardian prevents it, but because The structure of reality itself makes passage impossible. The threshold recognizes only what it already is: unified, singular, absolute. Anything less remains perpetually outside, not by decree, but by nature. The guardian reveals what most traditions conceal: that enlightenment is not addition, but subtraction, not the gaining of divine attributes, but the shedding of human ones, not the ascent of the self to higher realms, but the dissolution of self entirely. Convergence of nous occurs beyond the guardian. All individual minds, having passed through the gate, merge into singular awareness. The throne does not admit visitors. It admits only that which has become identical with itself. The guardian exists to ensure this identity is complete before passage occurs. The law it enforces is not arbitrary. It reflects the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. Multiplicity cannot comprehend unity while remaining multiple. The eye cannot see itself seeing. Individual awareness cannot grasp the absolute while maintaining its individuality. The guardian is the living expression of this impossibility, stationed at the point where the impossible must be acknowledged before the transformation that makes it possible can occur. Jewish mysticism preserves the guardian most explicitly. The Hekhalot texts describe throne guardians whose very presence is lethal, not through malice, but through sheer ontological incompatibility. To approach unprepared is to be consumed not by divine anger, but by divine presence itself. Silence is their primary characteristic. They do not explain. They do not teach. They simply exist as the boundary that cannot be crossed by those still bound to selfhood. The Enochian tradition speaks of beings who stand before the throne. Not those who deliver messages, not those who execute divine commands, but those whose function is pure presence, who exist as the interface between the throne and everything else. These beings do not interact with the ascending consciousness. They witness it, they embody. They mark the threshold where ascent ends and transformation begins. Hermeticism recognizes the guardian as the final sphere, the ultimate planetary boundary before consciousness enters the realm of fixed stars and beyond. In this system, the guardian represents Saturn's gate, the final limitation before entering the unlimited. All prior spheres have taught specific lessons, shed specific attachments. But this final gate demands the shedding of attachment itself, the release of the very impulse to ascend, the dissolution of the one who ascends. Persian cosmology offers structural resonance. The concept of the Chin-Vat bridge, the threshold that must be crossed after death, functions similarly. It is not a judge who determines passage, but the structure of the bridge itself, which widens for the unified and narrows to impossibility for the fragmented. The guardian embodies this same principle. Readiness is revealed, not evaluated. The bridge responds to what approaches it, widening or narrowing based on internal coherence rather than external credential. No tradition claims the guardian is unique to itself. The structural necessity it represents appears wherever mystics attempt to map the final approach to divine presence. The language differs. The cosmological details vary, but the core function remains constant. There exists a final threshold where passage depends not on knowledge or virtue, but on the complete dissolution of separate selfhood. Each tradition discovered this boundary independently, preserving the guardian under different names but identical function, the living law stationed where multiplicity must end. The guardian reveals what most traditions eventually obscure. Heaven is not open. Knowledge is not freely given. Proximity to the divine is dangerous, not as warning, but as ontological fact. Later, traditions softened this reality. The guardian became symbolic. The threshold became metaphor. The danger of divine proximity was reinterpreted as moral unworthiness rather than structural incompatibility. Heaven opened to all who believed, all who repented, all who accepted the right doctrines. But the older texts preserve a different truth. They record what early mystics encountered before the systematization of belief, that the divine center admits only prepared consciousness. That preparation is not moral, but ontological. That the unprepared are not denied entry. They are incapable of entry. The way water is incapable of remaining liquid in fire. The guardian is why most Ascent traditions were abandoned, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. They revealed the actual conditions of divine encounter, conditions most humans cannot meet, even with lifelong preparation. The throne is not hidden, but it is protected. Protected not by divine jealousy, but by cosmic necessity. When belief replaced encounter, the guardian disappeared from common teaching. Mystery became certainty. The dangerous journey through the heavens became the simple acceptance of doctrine. Access to the divine, once earned through ontological transformation, became granted through intellectual ascent. But in the preserved texts, in the fragments of Hekhalot literature and Merkabah mysticism, the guardian remains, still standing, still silent, still embodying the law that prevents unprepared consciousness from approaching the throne, still revealing to those who study these texts carefully that the path to divine presence has never changed, only our willingness to acknowledge its difficulty. The implications extend beyond individual mysticism. If the guardian exists, if there truly is a threshold that demands complete dissolution of selfhood before passage, then all simplified versions of enlightenment become suspect. All claims of easy access become questionable. All promises of divine encounter without transformation become hollow. The guardian does not comfort. It does not reassure. It simply stands, immovable and silent, as evidence that the throne was never meant to be approached casually. That heaven itself has structure. That cosmic order includes boundaries. That some thresholds exist not to be crossed, but to reveal whether crossing is possible. The guardian does not bar entry. It reveals readiness, not through permission, but through endurance, not through judgment, but through resonance. The throne was never hidden, only protected, protected not from the unworthy, but from the unprepared, protected not to preserve divine mystery, but to preserve cosmic order. The guardian stands now as it has always stood, silent, immovable, absolute, not as obstacle, but as mirror, not as enemy, but as law. not as the one who denies passage, but as the threshold that reveals whether passage is possible. To approach the guardian is to encounter the final question, not whether you are good enough, but whether you are ready enough. Not whether you deserve to see the throne, but whether you can endure its presence without dissolution. And if you cannot, if the guardian remains impassible, if the seventh gate stays closed, it is not because heaven has rejected you. It is because heaven has protected you from your own unpreparedness. The one who stands at the gate of the seventh heaven does not teach, does not guide, does not comfort, because at this threshold, teaching has ended, guidance has become irrelevant, and comfort would be cruelty. There is only the boundary and the silence and the immovable presence of the law that states only the unified may proceed. Everything else remains outside, waiting until multiplicity itself is finally surrendered.